Sound design is key to bringing your footage to life, allowing viewers to feel emotions and ensure your videos flow smoothly. Today I'm partnering with Adobe to show you my sound design workflow for a travel sequence using Adobe Stock. So this is some footage that I captured with some friends in Hawaii, and I thought this would be a good example because there's a mix of different locations here in this sequence. My process usually begins with my music, and I'll cut my sequence accordingly to the vibe and the beats of this track, and then I'll go ahead and mute that track line. Now we can focus solely on the sound. So there's diegetic sound and then there's non-diegetic sound, and diegetic sound are the things that should have been there in the environment when we were filming. So that includes ambient sounds. For example, when we were in the forest, you can hear the birds, or when we were at the beach, you can definitely hear the sounds of the ocean waves crashing. But sometimes you also have some unnecessary audio in there, like people talking, me behind the camera directing.
There you go. Cute!
Sometimes I'll use the actual audio that was there on location, but a lot of the times I end up just muting that video clip because something got in the way, the wind was too loud, and I actually have to end up sourcing a different sound effect. And this is where Adobe Stock comes in. Right within Premiere, you can access the Adobe Stock panel, and I can just search for any of the sounds that I'm looking for. So say I'm looking for just like a forest ambiance sound effect for the scene. I can go ahead to the Adobe Stock panel, filter into just sound effects, and source through dozens of assets. We're also not just limited to audio here, we can also source through videos, templates, and images, and I even ended up using some light leak asset that I found through Adobe Stock. I value my time so much, and that's kind of why I love the Adobe ecosystem, because I can kind of do a lot within the platforms that I'm in without having to switch softwares, and this goes the same with having Adobe Stock now in Premiere as well. I don't have to go to web to source different assets. And with the Adobe Stock Unlimited plan, you have access to millions of assets instead of just using credits every time. So usually on the third and fourth track lines, I'll have all of my ambient sounds. So I'll layer in multiple forest ambient sounds. For these next scenes, we were downtown, and so you should be able to hear some city traffic sound effects. And finally, we have this beach oceanfront sound. Once we have all of the ambient sounds laid out, we can switch over to the non-diegetic sounds, which can be some of these transition sound effects and more like the stylistic choices. We can get really creative here. Some favorites I like to use are camera clicks, whooshes, risers, and cinematic hits, but also I end up using just like random sounds like a match flicker, or I'll also find female breathing sounds like I feel like it makes people feel stressed. Depending on the situation, kind of like a whoosh, but it's just like a female breath. I think there's also certain really like satisfying sounds as well, like walking through grass is really cinematic sounding, or leaves sound really beautiful. So you can really get creative with it. Sound design in itself is a whole creative process because I will just add stuff that wasn't even there and I'll just make it into its own new thing. I'll even add like car honking sounds, even if there wasn't a car honking, just to transition better in between two different clips. I can add effects on these effects, which is kind of cool. You can add a low pass filter, or you can also add reverb, and it completely changed the vibe of the sound. Another thing I commonly do, especially with like whoosh sounds, is I'll change the speed of the sound to like 70% or 80% or even 90%. Every level sounds so different. You have so many different variations of the sound effect as well, which I just think is really cool. You'll want to make sure that your sounds kind of blend in together smoothly as well. Even if you don't look at the visuals, you don't have the music on, your sounds should still display the environment and you should know what's happening in your visuals without even seeing it. And so it's also important to make sure that these sounds blend in together nicely. So I'll also end up adding a constant gain effect onto the sounds. Your timeline should start looking really beautiful with all of these different sound effects layered. I end up going all the way until like track A10 just because I just keep layering, and it's really fun to get creative with this process. And that's how I use Adobe Stock to enhance my editing workflow and create beautiful sound design for my cinematic visuals. Thank you for watching.